You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
So we've talked a lot here in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast about the businesses going back into the downtown core and all the people associated with the smaller businesses finally kind of cranking up. Hey, we've got walk around traffic. We've got things happening, stores reopening, the little restaurants that support all of these big companies having all of these employees in downtown. You've got that going on. And at the same time, the city they're doing some sweeps. Whether you think sweeps are inhumane or that's just a whack-a-mole deal where you're literally smacking down a homeless encampment here and it has to move to here. There is a lot to that. And from that standpoint, you've got some interesting dynamics going on in Seattle. This past weekend, activists block weekend homeless camp removal outside Seattle City Hall. It's like down in the Super Bowl. LA was on a mad rampage to just clear out as much of the homeless encampments as possible that fronted onto big arterials where the world was basically going to, if you're going to the Super Bowl and you have to look at that stuff, you're like, oh, that's not good. This isn't the LA that I knew. Well, it's not the Seattle that I grew up with either. We've got going on now. But literally, you've got these activists who they join arms and stand in front of the construction device before it breaks ground on the big new housing complex. Now they're just standing there, not wanting the city to clean up garbage left behind. And there is a certain aspect to these people are living on the street. It's a horrible way to live. Our government shouldn't be allowing them to live on the sidewalk or the parks, but where do they go? And then what about, so you build a million units of temporary housing, tiny housing. You do that. So you've created a demand. When that happens, so you get all the people, you put a stop in time and you put all the people that are currently homeless here in Seattle into housing. Do you think that creates a little bit of a vacuum for other people? Hey, all those people got housing. Why not me? I'm down here in Phoenix. It's hot in the summer. Maybe I'll go up to Seattle. That is literally what I think you've got going on right now. People know that people are coming from as far away as not Portland, but Florida to be homeless here in Seattle because of basically our city just setting people up. Hey, you need a tent? We'll give you one. Hey, you need free needles? We'll give you that. We'll give you a big monthly allowance. It was interesting to look at the monthly allowance that the homeless get in Phoenix or Scottsdale versus Seattle. I mean, the numbers are staggering. And so the communities that pay, $500, $600, $700 a month to folks for disability or whatever it is that, you're going to be homeless on, those communities have a ton of homeless, whereas the communities who don't pay out, it's interesting, right? I mean, it's pretty much cause and effect. So San Francisco being one of those communities where they have typically paid well, and look what you get. So this past weekend, we had activists block the weekend homeless camp removal. So you've got this craziness going on where they'll start a sweep and then the activists show up, they're doing their protesting thing and, they do a little bit of that. And then the government basically comes back at a different time and the activists, they can't get two protests together in a short period of time oftentimes. So that requires a lot of work and a lot of dedication. And maybe it's raining or who knows what happens. And so the city ends up just, cleaning this stuff out. But in the meantime, you've got all these governmental workers that are out there supposed to be doing their thing. And you've got these activists just mucking it up. And we did a documentary recently, and I asked for the name of it. So Seattle volunteers remove garbage from homeless encampments while the city and the activists say stop. That was a documentary we did on Andrea Suarez and We Heart Seattle. And we showed the full interview because we're all about transparency here. And that means Actually, just playing the whole damn interview. All right, here you get to see behind the scenes. Ask me, hear me ask a bunch of questions, because our initial kind of documentary, it just focused on what Andrea had to say. And she'll say some stuff that a lot of folks are like, oh, yeah, that's not the narrative that we've heard about the homeless. That's not what we think. And here she is. She is somebody who is boots on the ground, literally picking up hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of hundreds of thousands of pounds, not dollars, pounds of garbage from Seattle streets, and, saving the city over $5 million in costs to pick up garbage. And then the city says, you know what? You're not following protocol. You need to put a stop on this. And the activists also said that. And the reason the activists say that, that's a hard no-go, you shouldn't pick up people's stuff, is because they truly believe it is not garbage, and they believe it could possibly be the homeless people's personal belongings. All right. But I think you got to make a judgment call there somewhere. And during these sweeps, they don't care if it is your stuff or if it is left behind. They're just going to come through and clear it out. And a lot of people would say, well, that is inhumane. Well, so is letting people live on the sidewalk during winter in Seattle. I mean, it's brutal. It's just not fun. I mean, it's cold, it's wet, it's dark, it's gray, it's depressing. And to be in a tent, there are some of those days where you wake up and it's just pouring outside and you're like, thank God I'm not living in a tent. And that is a horrible, horrible approach, because it means other people are living in a tent. And that's really sad. Our government shouldn't be letting them do that. So right now we've got this crazy tug of war going on between the homeless wanting to kind of camp out wherever and however and whenever. And yet you've got the city going, oh, geez, we got employees coming back to some of these big tech offices. Weyerhaeuser being the most noted recent. Now they've got a office space down in Pioneer Square. They said, well, I think we're coming back. So you're going to have these intersection of, big city, big tech, a lot of employees coming back, and a homeless population that has basically taken over downtown and taken over a lot of these areas. And so now there's going to be pushback by these campers, by these urban campers. This is our territory. You guys scram. This is where we live. And you're talking about a sidewalk. So, all right, let's take a quick peek-see and see what we got going on here. Seattle city workers have removed at least 24 homeless encampments across the city in 2022. They're on a rampage, and you know what? They need to be. This stuff needs to get picked up. It needs to get cleaned up. The tents that are just left behind, it drives me crazy. But the city workers had their most recent efforts thwarted over the weekend. The city had hoped to remove a pair of homeless encampments on 4th Avenue between James and Columbia in front of City Hall on Sunday. They posted a notice 2 days prior, as they often do. Activists with a group known as Stop the Sweep Seattle sought to prevent the sweep, calling on advocates to show up and push back on the removal and to bring signs and mutual aid supplies. So you're going to need to bring a sign and you need to mutual aid supplies. So the homeless, they get a ton of free stuff. Doesn't make me want to become homeless. No, because that's a tough way to go. But literally, they've got all kinds of services available to them. Oftentimes what they will say is that nobody's put me into permanent housing. And that is the big rub, is that we don't have enough units of permanent housing or even temporary housing, often to put these large number of homeless folks in, a roof over their head. And there's a big debate over, all right, but that's not getting them sober. It's not getting them through their mental whatever issues, which is the vast majority of folks who end up on the street have some combination of those two. And it just makes it all the harder. You put them in inside in a hotel somewhere, all right, but they've still got that struggle, either addiction or or mental issues, right? By Sunday, several advocates showed up to block city workers from clearing the encampments, holding the area for hours and refusing to allow outreach workers in to conduct the removal. Many of those living in tents along the street claimed that the city has failed to offer housing alternatives amid its recent uptick in camp removals. Over the weekend, shelter referrals were not offered for the 4th Avenue removal, with outreach workers reportedly telling campers that social workers are not available on Sundays. Why can't they just put us into permanent housing or a motel? One resident posited in an interview with Cairo TV. That way they won't see us out in these streets anymore on the sidewalk. Well, it's because it's incredibly expensive to do that for everybody who is out there. And here, why can't they just put us into permanent housing or a motel? They're just expecting that since they are unhoused to get housing. That is not how this works, unfortunately. Maybe you will have some temporary shelter, but you got to figure this out on your own. And here's where I find that breaking down. If these people are in such a predicament, either due to drugs, and you hate to say that, but those are oftentimes life choices, tough road, but ultimately, if we try and get you into treatment and you don't take it, well, then, that's kind of on you. On the other hand, if you're mentally not able, or maybe you're disabled, not able to work, those are situations where I think the government does need to step in. And either way, the government needs to step in. But we've just been so overwhelmed with all of these folks who, are literally demanding housing. Why can't you just put us into permanent housing or a motel? Well, because for us taxpayers, that's really expensive. It is wildly expensive to do just that. You look at it on a per room basis, it's incredibly expensive because it's not just that hotel or that motel. It's all the other services surrounding it, the mental health care, the addiction, services, just healthcare. People got teeth going sideways, all of that stuff we end up paying for, the taxpayers end up paying for. So now you've got just this real tug of war, and you've got the city kind of going ham on the homeless encampment removals. And, other areas of the country, you got Super Bowl happening. You've got other things going on where people are kind of getting back to normal. And that whole thing during the beginning of the pandemic, don't do any sweeps because you might just be pushing the Rona around. We don't want that. And let's be honest, having people move during the beginning of the pandemic, that didn't seem like the greatest ideas. But now we know more. We know what we're facing. And it's time to kind of get back on schedule because we have allowed, in so many communities, we have allowed this stuff to just grow unmitigated. And, in Seattle and Green Lake, we've been talking about that. You've still got communities that are dealing with this stuff, and it's gotten worse. You've got situations where you've got shootings, you've got assaults going on, all kinds of crazy stuff. And, and you've got a Seattle city government that is trying in some way, shape, or form to get a handle on this, but it's basically beyond their control right now. It's beyond their control. So they clean out an encampment, and those people end up just going to all kinds of different places. And as you kind of move further out, you can kind of see, and I'll be doing some walkabout, not podcast, but just kind of letting you know, this is some of what I'm going to be doing down the road is when I'm in an area where this kind of thing is going on in Seattle, I'm going to videotape it. I'm just going to walk through and videotape it, and you'll kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. You're talking about not in the centrally urban located areas, but in further out, you're seeing more and more tents because people are getting pushed out. And a lot of these folks, they're living in communities that way, just out in the woods, in the middle of the city. And, RV, we talk about RVs all the time. We've got eco blocks being placed to prevent the RVs from parking in front of people. Just this crazy tug of war going on. So this comes in the wake of a new initiative announced last week by Mayor Bruce Harrell, backed by $10 million in donations from local companies like Amazon, Starbucks, and Microsoft. That money will fund a team of 30 outreach workers operating from within the King County Regional Homeless Authority, which will be tasked with providing homeless campers with end-to-end services to get them into permanent housing. Okay, so that's what we continually hear. I'm not going to read this last part because we're basically, right now, the city of Seattle is prioritizing getting people out of the right of ways, meaning the sidewalks and streets, and also clearing out the parks. And that tells me one thing: the city knows that the employees are coming back to said office space. And this conflict is becoming very, very real. And this is happening across the United States, not just in Seattle. But this is the direct result of the pandemic and the whole CDC. Don't sweep encampments. They were bad before, and then they just, they got a little test boost, if you know what I mean. And now they're really strong and they're growing. And that's what's happened. They've doubled in size, kind of like one of those guys who goes wimpy into the gym and he gets on a little test and he starts working out and he just gets jacked in a very short period. That is literally what happened to our homeless encampments across a lot of these cities that have had this kind of influence going on, where we don't sweep and we don't keep things, we don't allow our residents to use the parks because we're not doing that. We have homeless encampments next to schools, literally on school property. You've got just all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So, yeah, you've got activists that are out there too, and they're oftentimes called mutual aid. And you can see some really good examples of mutual aid and how they handle things when you're watching our documentary, when you watch how 𝑹𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 kind of handles that. So we've got not only the main video, we've got kind of the behind the scenes, and then we've got it chopped up into little segments too. So you can Google 𝒂𝒂𝒕𝒍𝒆 and We Heart Seattle and all that good stuff. A lot of you guys have been watching that. That's been a popular series, and we're getting some good eyeballs on that stuff. But in the meantime, you've got these sweeps happening, and the activists, they're doing their thing, which is they don't believe people should be swept. And they don't believe people's belongings. They believe that, maybe somebody wasn't in their right mind. Maybe they were whacked out on drugs, or maybe they're having a psychotic episode. And they don't really know what they're saying as far as their own personal belongings go. All right. And so you shouldn't be taking them and putting them in the garbage. Okay. The flip side is so much of this stuff is so clearly garbage. It's, campsites that have been left behind and the city workers, they've basically got a task. They've been told from whomever, hey, got to go clean this out. And when these sweeps are going to happen because there are notices typically posted, and there are news stories saying, hey, there's going to be a sweep. I knew this Seattle City Hall. I knew this was going to happen this weekend. And so many of the parks have been swept because we're at that point now where it's kind of go time. Because if you let this go much further, it's going to get even nastier. So I will, be covering these topics. How much more activism will we have going on in the homeless encampments? It feels like it hasn't been all that strong lately. That's just from my end. We haven't seen a lot of protests. I had crazy protests down in Portland this past weekend where you had a homeowner with gun and then you had peaceful protester with gun basically have a shooting match, and some people got shot and were killed. So that's down in Portland with the activists. That's going on. That's a wild news story. Protester, armed protester. It's going to be difficult to paint a picture of them being peaceful when they're fully armed. Interesting, right? One of you had a question, and we're talking about housing here because a lot of people want to blame this on lack of affordable housing. All right, I get that. I do not believe that is the vast majority of causation for people to become homeless. But where rent starts to get to a certain point, taking up people's incomes, statistically, it has proven that people, they struggle. They struggle. And one of those things might be becoming homeless. But oftentimes, I think it's something, it's a number of different situations in their life. Maybe they're not at home anymore. Maybe they're out and about where they don't have the support system. Maybe they choose to go down a lifestyle of drugs. That's a lot of what I see. That's why you've got so many needles. But you've got this situation where you don't have a lot of affordable housing. And in Seattle in particular, you've got a ton of people looking to buy homes, nice families, individuals who are willing to work hard. They just want a home. And so I've had people send in to me, questions saying, is there ever a situation where a seller will sell directly Two, what, this person is probably, let's just say that they are, an older family member looking out for their family, and they just want to see their family, their young family get into housing, and they want to see them be able to buy a home. And so the question that came across my desk the other day was, is there ever a situation where a seller just does somebody, a good deed and sells them the house because they want to see it go to a nice, whatever, type of structure of family or whatever that is, husband and wife, husband and husband, 2 kids, wife and wife, whatever the combination is. I know there's about a cajillion combinations now. I'm not going to cover them all, but you get what I'm saying. Is there ever a situation where somebody sells direct? Because I think a lot of people are under the impression that big corporate is buying up homes, which they are, but not particularly here in the Seattle market. They're buying up homes across the United States. That is, but we've always had corporate investors. It's just that now it seems like they're a little bit stronger. And then we've got all the tech bros coming in and scooping up homes, right? Because they've got stock options. Just sell a small percentage of my stock options and, we'll get the down payment. So it's making it harder and harder for what could be, what historically would have been seen as like that nuclear family where, you want little Johnny and little Susie to be able to run in their fenced backyard. It's becoming harder and harder. People are having to go further and further out to find their ideal home or just a home that they can afford. It's become crazy expensive. So the question is there ever a time where somebody can work their way into a situation that they might not otherwise get as far as from a seller? And so my answer to that is yes, sometimes that does happen. But how that usually goes down is somebody is renting a house in a neighborhood and they find out that a seller is going to be selling, and they go over and basically hit them up. Hey, we'd like to buy your house. And maybe they are, they're close or they've had some kind of contact, and that seller isn't particularly concerned about money, and they end up selling the house to the nice young family. That is a story that does happen. I had that explained to me last Friday, in fact, by one of my brokers. They're like, okay, but this person got a house, and here's how I'm like, yeah, but those odds are slim to none for the average person. And here is why. Because the average seller, their goal is to maximize the amount of dollars coming out of the sale proceeds from the sale of their home. That is their goal, and that is their real estate agent's goal. So if that homeowner says to their real estate agent, I was going to put it on the market, but I just want to do this family over here a solid and let them have a really good deal because I want it to go to a nice family, then the real estate broker is typically going to say, all right, that's fine. That is ultimately your decision to do what you want. But my job that you hired me for, and is my, this is my financial obligation to you as a real estate broker, is to get you the most money for your home. And that's going to entail me putting it on the market, putting it in the MLS, because then all of a sudden the feeding frenzy happens and it gets escalated way above list price, far more than that nice family can afford. That is unfortunately the reason that the answer to this question is, do good things happen to nice people? Sometimes, but it's very rare and I wouldn't expect it. And so what I am seeing happen is these people that are looking for housing, they're having to go farther out or to another city altogether to get their little piece of the American pie. Because in the big cities like Seattle and anywhere, surrounding it, we've got, I think, 17 cities around Seattle that all have the median house price over $1 million. That is crazy. It's crazy. And if you want a decent house in a nice neighborhood, it's way more than that now. So, family members are trying to look out for other family members. And that's one of the things that I think about all the time is, where are my kids going to live? Like, I've got one that's fortunate enough where he's done really well and he really manages his money, and he bought a house in a very nice neighborhood in Seattle. It's not a house you'd want to raise, more than 2 people in, maybe 3 till the baby gets bigger and then the house is going to get tight. But it's one of those. And so, my other son and all the other kids that I know that aren't fortunate enough to have jobs where they're making, or they're not fortunate enough to have investment skills where they are putting away a little money and it's growing rather rapidly. Maybe those kids don't have those skill sets. Where are they going to live? Like, how far away from where they grew up, and where are they going to live? No, none of us are guaranteed housing. That's just not a thing. Somebody comes through and takes over your neighborhood. It's like, okay, money talks, what walks. I mean, that is basically how real estate works. So it is sad to see, but it's also kind of the marketplace. So I think the faster we kind of get used to the idea of, all right, can't afford here. What is my overall game plan? Where can I afford? Those are the questions that older family members need to be asking and putting into play. All right, where can you afford? Because the odds of us getting you a house here locally where you were raised, where I live as your older family member, I want to help out, I want to help raise the kids, whatever. The odds of that happening are slim to none. And it's because you leave so much money on the table to a seller. That seller is like, okay, I can give it to the nice family. All right, I really want to do that. But maybe my nest egg got taken out in the tech recession of 2001. Maybe that took my holdings down by 30%, and I'm still trying to build back up. And one of the ways I'm going to do that is through the sale of my home, my primary residence. So I want to make as much money as possible. That is your typical seller. That's your average seller. So you've got those conflicting, directions that people are going in, and we all want to see family members be able to afford a nice home in a great neighborhood. That is not happening. And I'm on the front end of that every single day, trying to figure out where these folks are going to go, that hard workers, good credit, decent down payment, they should be able to buy. But in today's market, good luck with that. In order to be in like top 3 offers, you basically have to just kiss away every single contingency and, tell Mr. and Mrs. Seller, here's $100,000 non-refundable earnest money. Please take our offer. We've got no contingencies. There's no building inspection. There's no nothing. Please, please, please let us buy your home. That is what people are resorting to. It's a crazy time. Will this end? Yes, at some point, but not anytime soon, because you don't have enough supply in the marketplace to have that downward trend of pricing anytime soon. So interest rates, yep, those are bumping up, but a lot of the folks that are buying homes right now, they are not interest rate sensitive. They've got enough money. They've got the firepower to go much further than the way interest rates are going to get bumped up. So I will talk about that in other podcasts. This one is done. But we've got those activists. They are out. They're blocking the city's efforts to get the sidewalks clean. That is an ongoing story that you can find right here on the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Soon to not be the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. Well, we'll deal with that when we get there. Thanks again for being here. Thanks again for supporting. I'll catch up with you soon. Bye for now.